I still remember the exact moment when something inside me started to feel wrong. Not a dramatic moment. No shouting. No slammed doors or broken dishes. Just a quiet evening in my kitchen in Phoenix and a few small details that didn't seem important at first. My name is David Carson. I own a small transportation company here in the city. Nothing glamorous, mostly freight contracts, regional delivery routes, warehouse transfers. The kind of business that keeps you on the phone all day and in your truck half the night. Most evenings I don't get home until 9 or 10. Sarah got used to that years ago. That night, though, something unusual happened. One of our trucks broke down outside Flagstaff and the entire route had to be canceled. Instead of spending the evening coordinating repairs and backup drivers, I suddenly found myself with nothing left to do. So I drove home. I remember feeling strangely relaxed as I pulled into the driveway. The sun had already gone down, but the air still carried that warm desert heat Phoenix holds onto long after dark. For once I thought maybe Sarah and I would actually have a quiet evening together. The house lights were on when I walked inside. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No TV. No music from the living room. Just the faint sound of a song playing somewhere deeper in the house. Sarah? I called out as I closed the front door. No answer. I walked toward the kitchen, loosening my tie as I went. That's when the smell of wine hit me. Not strong, but noticeable. When I stepped into the kitchen, I immediately saw why. 2 wine glasses sat on the table. One was in Sarah's usual spot. The other was across from it. Both were half empty. I stopped walking. For a moment I just stared at them. Sarah rarely drank alone. Wine for her was something social, something you opened when you had company or when we were celebrating something small like a finished contract or a good month for the business. Seeing 2 glasses meant only one thing. Someone had been here. As I was still standing there, Sarah walked in from the hallway. She was wearing one of those oversized sweaters she liked to lounge in at night, her hair tied loosely in a messy bun. For a split second she froze when she saw me. It was subtle, but I noticed it. "David?" she said. "I thought you were working late." "Route got canceled," I replied. "Truck broke down near Flagstaff." "Oh," that was all she said. Just "oh." Then she smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, that's a surprise." I nodded slowly and gestured toward the table. "You had company?" She glanced at the glasses like she had only just noticed them. "Yeah. An old colleague stopped by earlier." "From where?" "From the marketing agency I used to work at," she said quickly. "Remember? Before I quit." I did remember. Sarah had worked at that agency for almost 5 years before she decided she was tired of the office environment. At the time, I supported the decision. My company was doing well, and she said she wanted to focus on freelance projects. Still, something about her explanation felt rehearsed. I walked closer to the counter, and that's when I noticed the second thing. Pair of sunglasses. Men's sunglasses. They were sitting near the sink, folded neatly beside the dish rack. I picked them up. They were expensive. Dark lenses, metal frame. Definitely not the kind you bought at a gas station. "Whose are these?" I asked. Sarah barely looked up from her wine glass. "Oh, those must be his. Your colleagues." "Yeah." She took a slow sip of wine. "He probably forgot them." I turned the sunglasses in my hands, studying them. "Did he leave already?" "Obviously," she said with a small laugh. The tone of it felt forced. Then I noticed the third thing. Sitting on the table next to the second wine glass was a car key. Not a simple key, one of those modern key fobs for newer luxury cars. Definitely not mine. I picked it up. "This his too." Sarah let out a long sigh, the kind people make when they're already tired of a conversation. "David, seriously?" "What?" "He must have dropped it," she said. "I told him I'd text him if I found it." Her voice had changed. Just slightly. Less relaxed. More defensive. I set the key back down carefully. "You had wine with him. It's called being polite," she replied. There it was again, that tone. Sharp around the edges. "You're acting like I did something wrong." "I didn't say that." "But you're implying it," she said, crossing her arms. You come home and immediately start interrogating me. I asked 2 questions. Because you're paranoid. That word hung in the air. Paranoid. You work all the time, she continued. You barely come home before 9, and then suddenly you're acting like some detective. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Her voice had risen just enough to make the room feel smaller. You're overthinking things, David. Not everything is a conspiracy. I felt irritation creeping up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. I just asked who was here. And I answered, she snapped. Then she grabbed her wine glass and took another sip. You know what the real problem is? She continued. You're never here. You're always working. Always at the warehouse or on the phone with drivers. I blinked. What does that have to do with this? It means you come home looking for problems that don't exist. The words stung more than I expected. For a moment, I considered pushing the conversation further, asking more questions, but something stopped me. Instead, I just nodded slowly. All right. Her shoulders relaxed immediately. The tension disappeared from her face almost instantly. I'm going to finish my wine, she said, sitting down at the table. I turned and walked upstairs without another word. That night, we went to bed like nothing had happened. Sarah lay next to me scrolling through her phone, while the soft blue glow from the screen lit up the room. She looked completely calm. But I couldn't sleep, because in my head, the same 3 things kept replaying over and over again. 2 wine glasses, pair of men's sunglasses, and a car key that definitely didn't belong to me. At the time, I told myself I was probably overthinking it. Looking back now, that was the moment everything started to unravel. The strange thing about suspicion is that it rarely starts as a clear thought. It's more like a quiet feeling that sits in the back of your mind. First you ignore it. Then it starts connecting little memories you never paid attention to before. That night after I came home and found the second wine glass, I barely slept. Sarah fell asleep quickly beside me. She always did. Within minutes her breathing slowed, her phone slipped from her hand, and she rolled onto her side facing away from me. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kitchen table again. 2 glasses. Not 1. 2. At some point around 3 in the morning my mind started doing something dangerous. It began replaying the past. At first the memories seemed random. Small things. Little details. But the more I thought about them, the more they began to connect. Sarah hadn't always been like this. When we first got married, things were simple. She worked at the marketing agency downtown and usually got home around the same time I did. We cooked dinner together most nights. Sometimes we'd sit on the couch and watch terrible reality shows while arguing about which contestants would get eliminated. Back then, she used to tell me everything about her day, which coworker annoyed her, which campaign they were pitching, who brought bad coffee to meetings. It was ordinary life, comfortable, but about 2 years ago something changed. I remember the moment clearly now, even though at the time it didn't feel important. One evening she came home from work and announced she was quitting the agency. Just like that. I'm tired of the corporate grind, she told me while sitting at the kitchen island. I want to try something different. What kind of different? I asked. Freelance marketing, she said. Remote projects, social media management, branding work. At the time it made sense. My company had been doing well. We weren't struggling financially. If she wanted to try something new, why not? So I supported her decision. Looking back now, that's when the distance started. Without the structure of a normal job, Sarah's schedule became unpredictable. Some days she worked from home. Other days she said she had meetings with potential clients. Sometimes she said she was going to visit her friend Claire. Claire was someone she had known since college. They had always been close. But after Sarah quit her job, they suddenly started seeing each other a lot more often. At first, I didn't question it. Everyone needs friends. But the pattern slowly became strange. Sarah would leave in the afternoon and come back late at night. Not once or twice, but regularly. When I asked where she had been, the answer was always the same. Claire's place. Sometimes she would say they went shopping. Sometimes they had dinner somewhere. Other times they were just talking. The explanations were always casual, always simple. But the more I think about it now, the more rehearsed they seem. Another thing changed too. Her phone. For years Sarah had never cared about passwords. Her phone would sit on the coffee table, unlocked, while she went to the kitchen or took a shower. Then suddenly one day it was locked. At first I didn't even notice, until one evening when her phone buzzed while she was in the bathroom. I glanced at the screen automatically. Just a reflex. But instead of the message preview I was used to seeing, the screen only showed a notification. Password required. When she came back into the room, she picked it up quickly and typed the code. New phone settings? I asked casually. Yeah, she said without looking up. That was it. No explanation. Just yeah. Over the next few months, more things began to change. Sarah started going out more often. She bought new clothes, expensive ones, designer dresses, shoes I knew weren't cheap. At first I assumed it was part of her freelance work. Maybe she was meeting clients in nicer places. But then there were the trips. Weekend trips. Short ones, she said. Usually with Claire. Girls' getaway, she would call them. Las Vegas once. San Diego another time. A spa resort in Scottsdale. Every time she told me about them, she sounded excited, almost energized. Meanwhile, I stayed in Phoenix working, handling deliveries, managing drivers, trying to keep the company growing. Sometimes I would look at our credit card statements and notice how much money she had spent on clothes, hotels, and restaurants. It didn't bother me at first, but eventually it became hard to ignore. And then there was Claire. The more I think about her now, the more influence she seemed to have over Sarah. Whenever Claire came up in conversation, the topic always drifted toward lifestyle. Claire says we should travel more. Claire thinks Phoenix is too small for us. Claire says successful men spoil their wives more. Sometimes she compared me to people I had never met. Claire's boyfriend just bought her a new car. Or, Claire's husband takes her to Europe every year. At first I laughed those comments off, but slowly the tone changed. What used to sound like casual conversation started feeling like criticism, like I wasn't measuring up. Sarah never said those words directly, but the implication was always there. And over time something else changed too. The warmth between us disappeared. Not suddenly. Gradually. Conversations became shorter. Dinner together became rare. Sometimes days passed where we barely talked about anything meaningful. She still smiled, still laughed occasionally, but it felt distant, like she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. Back then I blamed my work schedule. I told myself I was too busy, that I just needed to spend more time at home. But lying awake that night after seeing the wine glasses, something inside me finally admitted the truth. All those small changes, all those strange patterns, they weren't random. They were pieces of a puzzle I had been ignoring for 2 years. And now that puzzle was starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Because for the first time, a question appeared in my mind that I couldn't push away anymore. What if Sarah hadn't just changed? What if she had been hiding something from me for a long time? For the next couple of weeks after the night with the wine glasses, I didn't say anything to Sarah. On the surface, everything looked normal. We had dinner together a few times. She asked about my business, I asked about her freelance projects, and we both pretended nothing had changed. But inside my head something had shifted. The quiet doubt that had once been easy to ignore was now constantly present. Every small detail seemed louder than before. The way she tilted her phone away when she texted. How often she checked it. How quickly she locked the screen when I walked into the room. None of these things proved anything by themselves. But together they created a feeling I couldn't shake. Still, I told myself I needed proof before jumping to conclusions. Suspicion alone wasn't enough to accuse someone of destroying a marriage. The confirmation came from the most ordinary place possible. A credit card statement. It happened on a Wednesday morning while I was reviewing monthly expenses for the company. I had my laptop open at the kitchen counter, checking invoices and bank transactions. Since Sarah and I shared a joint account for household spending, I occasionally glanced at the statements just to keep track of things. Most of the charges were normal. Groceries, gas, online purchases. Then one transaction caught my attention. The amount was large. Almost $800. The location was a hotel in downtown Phoenix. Not just any hotel. One of the most expensive ones in the city. At first I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a fraudulent charge. Maybe something connected to a business client using the same billing name. But the date stopped me cold. It was from the previous Saturday. I clearly remembered that day, because Sarah had told me she was spending the afternoon with Claire. A girls' spa day, she had said while getting ready that morning. She came home late that night, almost midnight. She said they had dinner afterward. At the time, I didn't question it. Now I stared at the screen for several long seconds. A spa day didn't explain a luxury hotel charge. Unless the spa was inside the hotel. But even then the price didn't make sense. Something about it bothered me enough that I decided to check the hotel's website, just to see what kind of services they offered. The moment the page loaded, my stomach tightened. The hotel did have a spa, but the spa charged separately. The amount on the statement matched almost exactly the price of a premium overnight suite. I leaned back in my chair slowly. For a moment I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Sarah booked something for Claire. Maybe it was a work event. Maybe. My phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting the thought. It was a message from one of my drivers asking about a delivery schedule. I answered automatically, but my mind wasn't on the conversation anymore. It was still on that hotel charge. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the hotel name again, this time on social media. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find. Probably nothing. Just confirmation that I was overthinking things again. Instead, I found something that made my chest feel hollow. A photographer's profile. His name was Ryan Blake. From what I could see, he specialized in photographing private events, parties, brand launches, luxury gatherings around Phoenix. Scrolling through his recent photos, I noticed one album posted just a few days earlier. The location tag was the exact hotel from the credit card statement. The event looked like some kind of exclusive party. Well-dressed people, champagne glasses, dim lighting and expensive decorations. At first I was just mindlessly swiping through the pictures. Then one image made my hand stop moving. I leaned closer to the screen, because standing near the center of the photo was Sarah. She was wearing a black dress I had never seen before. Her hair was styled differently than usual. She looked happy, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop. Next to her stood a man, tall, confident, one arm resting casually behind her back as they both looked toward the camera. Their bodies were close, closer than two strangers at a party usually stand. I stared at the image for a long time, trying to convince myself I was misunderstanding it. Maybe they had just met. Maybe the photographer told everyone to group together. Maybe. Then I swiped to the next photo. And the next. In several of them Sarah and the same man appeared together again. Sometimes standing side by side. Sometimes laughing. In one photo he was leaning close to say something in her ear. She was smiling. The kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. The caption under the album listed a few names connected to the event. Among them was Ryan Blake himself, which meant the man in the photos might actually be the photographer, or someone connected to him. Either way, the important detail was clear. Sarah had not spent that Saturday with Claire. She had been at a private party inside a luxury hotel, with another man. For several minutes I just sat there staring at my phone. The strange part was how calm I suddenly felt. Not angry, not panicked, just clear. All the confusing pieces from the past 2 years started sliding into place. The late nights, the trips, the sudden secrecy, the expensive clothes. And now this. The truth wasn't a theory anymore. It was right there in front of me. My wife had been seeing someone else. And judging by how comfortable she looked in those photos, it hadn't started recently. It had probably been going on for months. Maybe longer. I locked my phone and placed it back on the counter. When Sarah came home that evening, she greeted me with the same casual tone she always used. "How was work today?" Busy, I said. She nodded and went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. Watching her move around the room, I realized something important. She had no idea that I knew. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I decided not to tell her. Not yet. Once I saw those photos, something inside me changed. Before that moment, I had still been clinging to doubt. Not hope exactly, just uncertainty. A part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation I hadn't considered yet. But the images from that party destroyed that illusion. Sarah hadn't been with Claire that Saturday. She had been at a private event in a luxury hotel, smiling beside another man like she belonged there. And judging by how comfortable they looked together, it clearly wasn't the first time. What surprised me the most was my reaction. I didn't feel the explosive anger people always describe in stories like this. There was no dramatic urge to confront her, no immediate demand for answers. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. It was the kind of calm you feel when something you've been confused about for a long time suddenly becomes clear. For 2 years, I had been trying to understand the distance growing between us. I blamed work, stress, schedules, anything that would keep the marriage intact in my mind. Now the truth was simple. Sarah had already left the relationship. She just hadn't bothered to tell me yet. That evening she walked into the house around 7 like nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked while dropping her purse on the counter. "Busy," I said. It wasn't even a lie. Work had been busy, but my mind had been somewhere else entirely. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen island. The same casual routine she followed almost every night. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't show it. For a moment I studied her quietly. The way she held the glass. The way she checked her phone every few minutes. At one point a message appeared and her expression softened slightly as she read it. Then she typed a response quickly. A few seconds later the phone buzzed again. She smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough. I already knew who she was texting. I just didn't say anything. Instead I asked about dinner. We ordered takeout. We watched television. From the outside we looked like a completely normal couple. But internally I had already started planning. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not dramatically. Not with some emotional speech about betrayal. Just a quiet phone call to a family law office that had been recommended to me by a business associate months earlier. The receptionist scheduled a consultation for later that week. When the day arrived, I drove to the office downtown after finishing work at the warehouse. The lawyer was a woman named Patricia Morgan. She had the calm, analytical demeanor of someone who had handled hundreds of divorce cases. After we sat down in her office, she asked a simple question. "So, David, what brings you here today?" I didn't give a long explanation. "My wife has been seeing someone else," I said. Patricia didn't look surprised. Unfortunately, I suspected she heard that sentence often. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Yes." I showed her the photos from the event. Then I explained the hotel charge. She studied the screen for a moment before nodding. "That's useful," she said. "Useful?" In divorce proceedings, evidence of infidelity can influence asset division depending on the circumstances. Her tone remained completely professional, like she was discussing a business contract rather than the collapse of someone's marriage. But strangely enough, I appreciated that. Emotion wasn't going to help me now. Strategy would. We spent almost an hour reviewing financial details. Our house, our bank accounts, my business investments. Fortunately, one thing worked in my favor. Before we married, Sarah and I had signed a prenuptial agreement. At the time, it had seemed like a simple precaution because of my company. Now it suddenly became very important. Patricia reviewed the document and nodded again. "This protects your business assets," she said. "Which is good. What about everything else?" "We'll handle that carefully." When I left her office, the sky outside was already turning orange with sunset. For the first time since discovering the photos, I felt something close to relief. Because now I had a plan. Over the next few weeks, I started quietly organizing things. Financial records, investment accounts, property documents. Nothing illegal, Nothing dramatic. Just making sure everything was structured in a way that protected my interests once the divorce process began. At the same time, I acted completely normal at home. I didn't confront Sarah. I didn't question her late nights. When she said she was going to see Claire, I nodded. When she stayed out late, I didn't ask where she had been. At first, she seemed relieved. Maybe she thought my suspicions had faded. Maybe she believed she had successfully convinced me nothing was wrong. But after a while, I noticed something interesting. My silence started to make her uncomfortable. Because for the first time in years, I stopped trying to please her. I stopped asking how her day went. Stopped adjusting my schedule around her plans. Stopped reacting to the subtle criticisms she used to throw my way. Instead, I focused entirely on my work, on my company, on my future. And the more emotionally distant I became, the more she seemed to notice. One evening she looked at me across the dinner table and frowned slightly. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Just busy." "You're always busy." I shrugged. She studied my face for a moment like she was trying to read something, but I kept my expression neutral. Eventually she looked back down at her phone. The conversation ended there, but I could tell something had shifted, because Sarah had spent 2 years slowly pulling away from me, and now, without realizing it, I had started pulling away from her too. The difference was that my decision was intentional. And unlike her, I already knew exactly where it was leading. Over the next month, our house started to feel like a stage where two actors were performing completely different plays. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. Sarah still left the house several evenings a week. Sometimes she said she was meeting Claire. Other times she mentioned freelance meetings, networking events, or dinners with friends. I stopped asking for details. At first she didn't seem to notice, but after a while my silence began to bother her. It showed in small ways. She started watching me more closely when we were in the same room. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me like she was trying to understand what I was thinking. But there was nothing for her to read. I had become careful, deliberately calm. One evening she came home around 10 o'clock. I was sitting in the living room reviewing some delivery reports on my laptop. "You're still working?" she asked as she dropped her purse near the couch. "Just finishing a few things." She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, then returned with a bottle of water. Instead of going upstairs like she normally did, she sat down in the chair across from me. For a moment she didn't say anything. Then she asked, "Are you mad at me about something?" The question surprised me. I looked up slowly. "Why would I be?" She hesitated. "I don't know. You've just been different." "Different how?" "You barely talk anymore." I shrugged lightly. "Busy month." She studied my face like she was searching for something deeper. "You used to ask about my day. You usually say it was fine." "That's not the point." Her voice had a sharp edge to it now. The strange part was that a year earlier this conversation would have bothered me. I would have tried to reassure her, explain myself, fix the tension between us. Now I simply closed my laptop. "I'm tired," I said calmly. "I'm going to bed." I walked upstairs without waiting for a response. Behind me I could feel her staring. That was the first time I realized something interesting. For 2 years Sarah had grown used to having emotional control over our relationship. She knew exactly how to redirect arguments and shut down uncomfortable questions. But now the dynamic had changed, because I wasn't playing that role anymore. Around the same time, something else began happening. Her schedule started shifting. At first it was subtle. Instead of staying out late several nights a week, she began coming home earlier. Sometimes she even stayed home entirely. One Friday evening she surprised me by suggesting we go out to dinner together. "We haven't done that in a while," she said. I agreed without hesitation. The restaurant was one of those quiet places in downtown Phoenix where couples usually go for anniversaries or business meetings. Soft lighting, slow music, expensive wine. For most of the dinner, Sarah seemed unusually attentive. She asked questions about my company, about my drivers, about the expansion contract I had been negotiating. It felt almost like the early years of our marriage again. But there was something forced about it. like someone trying to repair a situation they didn't fully understand. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about moving?" "Moving where?" "Somewhere bigger," she said. "Maybe California. Or New York." "Why?" "I don't know. Just a change." I took a sip of water before answering. "My company is here." She nodded slowly. "I know." The conversation drifted after that. Later that night, when we returned home, she stayed in the living room instead of going upstairs right away. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Sure." "Are you happy?" The question hung in the air for several seconds. Finally, I answered honestly. "I'm focused." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer I have." She didn't respond. Instead, she looked down at her phone. A moment later, the screen lit up with a notification. She read the message quickly. Then something strange happened. The relaxed expression she had been maintaining all evening disappeared. Her shoulders tightened slightly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said quickly, but she stood up almost immediately. "I'm going to take a shower." She walked upstairs, leaving her wine glass on the table. I sat there for a long time staring at the dark screen of the television, because that brief reaction had confirmed something. Whoever she had been seeing, something between them was starting to change. Over the next couple of weeks, the signs became clearer. Sarah seemed restless, more anxious than usual. Sometimes she would start typing a message on her phone, then delete it. Other times she stared at the screen like she was waiting for a reply that never came. One night, I overheard her speaking on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was quiet but tense. "You said that before," she whispered. There was a pause. Then she said something that made the situation suddenly obvious. "I'm not asking for anything serious. I just need to know where this is going." The rest of the conversation was too quiet for me to hear. But I didn't need to hear it, because the meaning was already clear. Her relationship with the other man was falling apart. And for the first time since everything started, Sarah Carson was beginning to realize that the life she had taken for granted might not be as permanent as she thought. A few months after I filed for divorce, Sarah found me through a private investigator. By then, I had moved to another state and rented a small place near the coast. When she showed up at my door, she looked nothing like the confident woman who used to criticize my life. She asked if we could start over. I listened quietly and then told her the truth I had finally accepted. She never loved me the way I loved her. She loved the life I gave her. The moment those words left my mouth, the hope in her eyes disappeared. After the divorce was finalized, I didn't return to Phoenix. I bought a small house near the ocean and focused on rebuilding my life, my business, my routines, and the friendships I had neglected for years. For the first time in a long time, the silence around me felt peaceful instead of heavy. As for Sarah, I heard through mutual contacts that things hadn't gone well for her. Debt, lost connections, a damaged reputation. The life she once chased had disappeared, and the marriage she destroyed was the one thing she could never get back.